Okay, thanks for joining us today. I'm Brad Berman. I'm counsel in the Capital Markets Group at Mayer Brown. Today we're going to talk about SOFR floating rate notes. I think the first question that comes to me when I look at one of these offerings is, why are these so complicated with this nasty formula? LIBOR was so easy. So let's talk about the difference very quickly. LIBOR is a forward-looking term rate. So if you have a 3-month interest period, and the interest reset date, the beginning of the period, you look at a screen, you know the rate, you already know what the payment's going to be 3 months hence. It's very, very easy. SOFR is very different. It is a backward-looking daily rate. So how do you get from a backward-looking daily rate to a 3-month rate? And in fact, it's a 3-month rate being calculated in arrears. So in other words, you don't know the rate at the beginning of the period. You only find out at the end when you've added up, compounded, et cetera, all the interest during that time. So another issue that creates is that your typical interest period is from and including an interest payment date to, but excluding the next one. So let's say your interest payment date's Friday. Well, that means you need to include Thursday's SOFR rate in your calculation, but you don't know that till 8 a.m. Friday morning, and in fact, it can change up till 3 p.m. So that leaves you calculating the rate and paying it to holders on the same day, which just doesn't work. So what's the answer? Well, the ARC came out with 4 different variations on how to do SOFR over a period of time, and particularly how to create a little space before the interest payment date. So one of them is called look back, and simply any day in the interest period is taking the reading that was, let's say, 5 U.S. government securities business days before. So that builds in a 5-day period. So for example, on your Friday interest payment date, you actually knew the last rate the previous Friday. So you've got a whole working week to calculate the rate and pay people. The second one they came out with was called observation period shift. And what this is very simple. Is within your interest period, you are shifting back a period of time called the observation period. And that's what you're calculating interest on, not the interest period, the observation period. If you shift it back 2 or 3 U.S. government securities business days, you've created a little space to calculate the payment, calculate the interest and get it paid. And the last one they came out with was called payment delay. And just as the name says, simply you get paid in a delayed. So for example, if your interest payment date's Friday, you're going to get paid Tuesday. Now, for maturity or early redemption, what you do with that is they have what they call a rate cutoff date or a lockout. So in other words, if your maturity date was a Friday, you might say the lockout is on Tuesday. That's the rate cutoff date. The SOFR rate, Tuesday's rate, will hold for the rest of the period. That way you can get paid on time on the maturity or early redemption date. Another way that's a little easier, and I think this has become more popular for retail investors because this gets away from this sort of calculus book type formula you see in the offering document, is the Sofer Index. And the index is good because the compounding is all built into the index level. It goes back to April 2, 2018, so it reflects compounding in SOFR since that date. And all you have to do there is simply pick your start date at the beginning of the interest period, your end date at the end. And again, you can, like the observation period, the ARC example shifts it back a couple of days, and you compare the 2 index levels, your floor, your rate at 0, and you have your compounding all built in. So the index has become seems to be a little more popular in the retail space. Now, the last thing is term SOFR. Now, term SOFR, that is a forward-looking term rate. So that sounds a lot like LIBOR, doesn't it? And it sounds a lot easier where, again, if you have a 3-month interest period in your SOFR floating rate note and you have term SOFR, you can simply take a reading on that day. It seems like a great plug-and-play difference. However, the Alternative Reference Rates Committee, the ARC, which doesn't make rules, they make statements, what they have said is they support the use of term SOFR for the business loan market. They don't support it for most derivative transactions. And in the world of floating rate notes, they only support it in its role as the first fallback rate when there are if you have a LIBOR floating rate note out there that uses the ARC's recommended fallbacks to SOFR, the first replacement rate in the rate waterfall is term SOFR. They approve of that. They also approve of its use, for example, when what they call the New York Legislative Solution, which is now Article 18C of the New York General Obligations Law, what that does, you had your legacy LIBOR floating rate notes with your old 2006 is the definition polling fallbacks, which don't work under the New York law. Once LIBOR ceases for the popular rates, that'll be June 30, 2023, they will flip over to SOFR using the ARC's recommendations. The ARC plans to put out a statement saying, term SOFR will be the first. So they are not recommending or supporting the use of term SOFR in newly issued floating rate notes. They're worried that there's not enough, I think they're worried there's not enough transaction, and they're worried the hedging might cannibalize the data used to calculate term SOFR. Now, ARC is a body that speaks mainly to banks. Corporates may ignore that advice, but that's what's going on with term SOFR. Anyways, if you would like to learn more about this, please visit our free writing and perspectives blog. And thank you for listening to me.